Take you quickly through some remarks I have, and then we'll take a short break before we go into our final level center today. So again, thanks to all of our co-conveners and sponsors for making this possible. John Taylor from LG Electronics dropped by yesterday, and I didn't recognize him, but we do appreciate the partner support we have. So I'm just going to retrace something I said yesterday to help make the points I'm trying to make later about this. So these are the key attributes of NextGen that really support better alerting. Geo-targeting, rich media, deep indoor reception, device wake up, resilience, and all IP integration, meaning that yes, it's one way, but it natively integrates with other IP networks for return path or whatever you want to do with it. The FCC actually calls NextGen TV broadcast internet, and they have taken steps to improve the deployment rate and make it easier to provide public services and commercial services. So we have some ways to go on the regulatory side, but there is a recognition. This really this came during the pandemic when we were trying to bridge the broadband gap that we've talked about with the signal. So, at least when I started working when we founded Awarn, my thought was primarily that we will be sending the alert information directly from the call tower to individual receivers, and I think that will continue to happen, probably will be the principal way of delivery. But we do have to think about this concept of a network of networks where you're talking about broadband, broadcast integration, a way to extend iPods, and it can be the signal, the message can be received and retransmitted across other networks. It's not unlike what we did back in 2005 in our experiments with the White House that in part led to the president creating iPods. But we can do it. It's much more robust now, and it's all IP. We're not encapsulating anything. So we could be first in that. We can't encrypt it, as we mentioned yesterday. If we need to, we can encrypt for authorized users, first responders. Also, it's perfect for the intelligent transportation system, which I'll talk about in just a second, and the Internet of Things. It doesn't have to be people. So within the home, I just pulled these from the Internet. There's not an ATSC receiver in these diagrams, but the whole concept is if the home has a dongle or a set-top box or a new TV set, it can connect to other devices in the home, including smartphones and laptops and tablets. So think of the ATSC 3.0 receiver in the home as a kind of media hub. It can integrate with all of these other devices. And so it gets around the problem that was identified in the FCC's notice of inquiry. How do you do how do you do alerting over streaming media? The response from the industry was it's damn hard. Not sure we can do it. But you don't have to do it if you can take the alert off the air to a set-top box that's always listening for that signal. Of course, the thing can be for watching television, but if it gets the alert, you can just put it on the screen as an overlay over whatever you're streaming. So these are examples of the kinds of products that are coming on the market. This is a dongle from a company that's based in Taiwan and Atlanta. You can see it's got multiple tuners for television viewing, and it can handle 1.0 and 3.0 is what I'm saying. And it can handle a whole lot of things. And this is going to be at a pretty reasonable price point. It's also more of a set-top box. These dongles are optimized for computers, but you can see HDMI out, and it will have Wi-Fi and Ethernet. Could have Bluetooth as well. So it's not just the home. We talked a bit about connected cars yesterday. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for using 3.0 for connected cars. And the car can answer more about this than I do, but as I understand ITS, the whole communication system is based on extremely short range systems. Even if it graduates to 5G, it's going to be very hard to build it out. That network is subject to grid failure or congestion or hacking. With 3.0, at minimum, it could be a backstop for reaching all these vehicles in an entire metro area that you can geographically target for one transportation corridor. And I'd like to pass along any positive press I get. I was quoted at the ATSC annual meeting saying we have to work with the manufacturers and the third-party OEMs to put in the equipment. Dell has done a lot around this. It's also clear from talking to people in the ITS sector that we also need to talk to the transportation authorities that are creating the standards for what kinds of radios a vehicle should have, the infrastructure in the vehicle. So they concept is via X. It used to be vehicle or vehicle infrastructure. Now it's via everything. And we think 3.0 could be a major problem solver for this industry, which also has regulatory problems. They lost half of their designated spectrum to wireless cable.
When it comes to cars and potentially...
Can you use the mic?
Oh, sorry.
When it comes to cars and potential alerts, could the cars actually end up doing it if you're on the roadway and there's a flood in front of you? Is that an example of what an alert might look like for a person just sitting in their car and wondering, hey, can I drive through this street?
Yeah, so there's vehicle communication, and then there's one-to-many communication. So for instance, a lane closure could be transmitted over the air. Just like, now my example is, if you ever get in your car and you turn on FM radio, can you receive music? Right? So you can take a lane closure, MDOT or DelDOT or the VA, Virginia Department of Transportation, and close a road or a lane. They know that ahead of time. That can be transmitted to the car. Now, with what you're talking about is vehicle to vehicle and vehicle back to a location, right? So for instance, how many times did we bring down the highway and there is a big truck tire that just blew up and there's a big piece of rubber and debris in the road? For those of us who use Waze, we can report that and it gets sent back, right? So if you think about Waze on steroids, then yes, eventually they want to get to vehicle and many to vehicles. So all that's being thought about in the automotive world. And so that's why I said yesterday that car manufacturers, they want everything. They want 5G, they want 4G, they want a satellite. So I think they all want to cover their bases with any form of communication. Because the reality is that once you build the chips and have these software-defined radios in them, it's just a matter of stamping out the chips. Somebody said yesterday, somebody mentioned yesterday about FM radio, FM receivers being built into cell phones, and that's true. They just haven't turned it on. But can you imagine cell phone guys not turning on underneath? You know, I think that would be a problem. So really, to answer your question is, yeah, it's all being thought about. Again, we've done a demo based on geolocation in Seoul, Korea. I mentioned it, I don't know if you were here yesterday. But we rode around Seoul, Korea based on your GPS location. You were getting different content sent to you. So for of autonomous cars or even, you know, driver assistance. That's a big deal. And also infotainment. That's the other stuff. So I answered the question.
Thanks, Bill. So, the resilience in the face of power failures, or anything, I think about the horrific debacle on I-95 from here in Richmond in January, when all those cars were stranded. But, you got examples, I showed this yesterday, a couple of them. This is cellular outage in the Gulf region after Hurricane Ida, which was about a year ago, over a year ago. Cellular was highly compromised and not wiped out, and then full power TV stations stayed over here. And it's not just storms. We have other incidents where you need the resilience. Part of the key to it is you need battery-powered devices to receive it. And disclosure, I'm not here selling anything, but I think it's important for you to understand that not all of this is theoretical in terms of implementation, that the market is actually responding. Matt's Rev is a partner of mine. They have an existing company that's been in business for 14 years. It uses the FM radio RDS, which is how you get the name of the artist and the song on your car radio to do alerting. And they're concentrated in California and the Gulf States. They have a license with Shake Alert to get out in earthquake early warning. We now know how to arbitrage the different ways and usually give people a warning, but you have to get that alert out really, really fast to get kids under desks or to stop the surgery or to open the firehouse door before the power goes out. And this is the receiver they use now. Matt, you got one with you?
Yeah.
Sorry. Impatient. Anyway, it makes a loud noise. But we're creating a new company, we create a hybrid product that can receive the FM and AEN, our AEI. It's called America's Emergency Network. This device could be the dongle or the set-top box I showed you. It could include this purpose-built alerting capability, and or it could be a very simple, low-cost device like this. This map is, you saw it in the prototype UX yesterday. It came from Santa Barbara County. This is debris flow data areas. But that's the kind of rich media that we could display. This thing could be plugged into the wall, but when the power goes out, it can survive for much longer. We talked about pathways yesterday. In this service, they are using, and we will be using satellite. We link the emergency manager, the sheriff, or whoever is the alert originator, with the other stations. We can use the same pathway for AEI. I guess my final point about the road ahead and its funding has come up. John mentioned it. There's a lot of money out there. I'm not a grants expert, and I haven't really burrowed into the details of these major legislation pieces that got done, including the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act had $47 billion for resilience. There's evacuation language in there, improving evacuation in the face of climate resilience. Inflation Reduction Act has the most money ever allocated by the U.S. government for climate change. There's a new public television program. Benny Curran mentioned this yesterday. Money goes to FEMA. I think co-administered with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. There's $40 million already, another 40 in the pipeline, and this can be used for toward emergency information. But I used to be a lobbyist. I was head of the Association of Public Television Stations, as I mentioned yesterday. And I know that I'm very confident that the coalition, it can't just be the broadcasters, and it can't just be commercial or just public. It has to be organizations represented in this group. I'm pretty confident that we can secure some dedicated federal funding if the grant route doesn't prove productive. Because there is a big constituency in Congress for improving alerting. It just hasn't been developed. But anyway, there's business models, and there's all sorts of different ways to get to this, to improve the system. I was a little surprised that a lot of the associations that represent the emergency managers, to my knowledge, based on what they told me, they did not ask for any dedicated alerting funding in these legislations, but I think the opportunity is there. So we've got just a couple of minutes before we go to a break. Mike?
Sure, I think I mentioned it to you in the hallway yesterday. Another good venue for this type of activity, if you're trying to get the word out, is something like an IEM conference, just loaded with emergency managers, But one of the things I'm curious, you didn't show, I'm curious about like a Roku. A lot of people buy Roku-like devices, then there's an Amazon has theirs, and I think Google or Android has theirs. How is it costly? Could ATSC 3.0, could that capability be built into one of those devices? And if so, how much would it? I mean, I see what Matthew was showing with his, and what you were showing on the screen there. But I imagine you could do the same thing with a streaming device, like a Roku, right? And how expensive would that be? How much would that cost? How much would that add to the cost? I bought one for $30, a couple of weeks ago.
There's active work amongst multiple providers of set-top boxes, which is essentially what a Roku device is. That and dongles that John mentioned to incorporate ATSC 3 capabilities in those. We are highly focused on getting ubiquitous distribution of a low-cost Roku set-top type device or a dongle available as quickly as possible to all people in the United States. The reason for that is this. You'll recall yesterday that I just talked about this requirement that the FCC has imposed on all broadcasters to simulcast their ATSC 1 program, or their ATSC 3 programming in ATSC 1. In other words, if you're an ATSC 3 station or a station that wants to convert over to ATSC 3, the FCC says all that programming that you're running has to be able to be received in an ATSC 1 environment, because we don't want to, quote, disenfranchise, end quote, current viewers on legacy equipment. So they said to broadcasters, rather than making it mandatory the way they did from analog to digital, this is going to be voluntary, and rather than doing it on a nationwide basis, we're going to make you do it on a market-by-market basis. And we're going to make you do this simulcast. Well, if you simulcast your programming, you're an ATSC, you're a broadcast station that wants to convert over to ATSC 3, you have to find a home for all your ATSC 1 programming. That means you have to go to the other broadcasters in the market that aren't moving over to 3.0 and say, please, will you host my program? And they'll say yes, but the quid pro quo for that is that their programming, their primary network type programming, has to be carried on your station in 3.0. So it eats up most of the ATSC 3 capacity. We want to get rid of that simulcasting requirement. And the way to do that is to go right after what the FCC's concern is, which is to say, we don't want to disenfranchise current viewers, so you give them an inexpensive dongle type device or Roku set-top box type device that receives ATSC 3 over the air plugs into their legacy set that's a 1.0 set, and suddenly they can receive 3.0 programming. If you go there and then you go back to the FCC and said, your concerns have been met, you'll recall when we went from analog to digital, the government gave you coupons for a converter box, remember that? That's what this essentially is. These are essentially converter boxes, but they're in a form factor of a dongle or a Roku device. There are many companies that we're working with that are putting 3.0 capacity in those. We want to get those out as quickly as possible, at low cost as possible, incorporated in the devices so that we can get rid of the simulcast requirement, so that we can have complete access to all of our 3.0 capacity, not just for video services, but for other data casting services, the primary one of which is advanced emergency informing. We have all sorts of other things. We have a whole process that Dell is ahead of called DDAS, Data Delivery as a Service. We think we can reuse a portion of our spectrum, our channel, our 6 megahertz, that is more than just television. We can do all sorts of data casting. Advanced emergency informing is just one of them.
So if I have a, if Roku, for example, could decide to build,
Yes.
put this chip in
And they are.
Roku, and they, not some additional dongle, but
Right.
the Roku, because I've tied it all to 6 out of a USB, out of a HDMI,
Right.
I just ported it back to my TV, my Roku, and it was $30 for the
Right.
device. How much does this add to the cost of that?
We think that, and we've talked to a number of dongle and set-top box makers, and I can't make a statement for them, but we think that the sweet spot is in the $30-40 range to have a dongle that has ATSC3 capability, that has an HDMI port so that you can stick it into your set and it will carry the ATSC3 programming on an ATSC1
Is that
set.
on top of my existing cost of the $30 for this?
No, you would, the one
So I
dongle.
go streaming and
We'll do
ATSC for $30-40.
We'll do everything. And that's what it's an SoC, a system on a chip.
Right.
We've developed a chip with our friends at Samkhya Labs in India, and that's exactly what we're demonstrating in India now, the ability to use a system on a chip within the device. And as I say, we're having conversations with multiple set-top box manufacturers and dongle manufacturers, including Roku, that would include 3.0 in a cost-effective way.
And real quick question, what does it use as an antenna?
Has built-in antenna.
Okay. Doesn't need anything big, it's already.
Well, it's mostly UHF band.
Okay.
So in UHF band, the antennas are a lot smaller.
Right.
It's harder.
Again, going back to the fact that it receives at a much lower signal level, is ATSC3 is effective at a much lower signal reception level than ATSC1.
Okay, I'll take one more question, then we gotta take a break.
This is a little bit more, or a little less of a question, more of just a plug. You mentioned the funding and the advocating for the funding. As the vice chair for IAEM's Government Affairs Committee, I would say, if you have suggestions for funding allocations and funding additions that need to be made, we work throughout the year directly with the staffers and the folks on both the House and the Senate side, as well as our partners at FEMA, on helping develop those and make recommendations. And so we do it in coordination with both NEMA, the National Emergency Management Association, and Big Cities EM, and we will typically all sign on to those recommendations together. So if this group has a recommendation that they want us to get behind in terms of support on a specific alerting line item, alerting addition, let us know, and we'll be happy to put it in front of our membership, because again, that's the one of the biggest ROIs that we have back to our membership is our ability to advocate for stuff like this on the Hill.
Okay, well, my work is done. I think we just go home now. No, definitely, let's talk. I'm so glad that Mike got you here. Matt?
Yep, real quick. So I wanted to, because we spent 9 years lobbying the FCC and the cell industry to get the FM chip in the phone. And they perceived it as the FM radio, free FM radio, as competition to their streaming audio business, music business. So that's why it didn't happen. So what we're doing, we have the the FM chip and the ATSC 3.0 chip in here. So what's important, when Jerry showed the coverage map, what happens when you leave the TV coverage area and you're in a mobile environment and you're running away from an earthquake, disaster, or fire, it will automatically roll over to the FM coverage, which are 14,000 stations existing. So we have a seamless alerting platform. It could even have the NOAA weather radio chip in it, and when this consumes the vertices that come from, as Mike said yesterday, which is really the important data, and then creates, which is a polygon, and then processes that, and then displays it if it's in the polygon or outside the polygon. So this fills that gap where internet, cell, and the power's out, and also it fills the gap when mobile, and wakes you up in the middle of the night. So those are the things. I think that's
Thanks.
important.
To the point about the opportunity, as you know, the digital to analog conversion, or analog to digital conversion in the 2000s, the government had a multi-billion-dollar voucher program where people could get a set-top box to receive digital over the air, so we could turn off analog. It could be that probably in a needs-based way, we could take a similar approach to getting our 3.0 receivers out there that can give people access to learning. Matt told me that the Shasta County, California Sheriff they bought a bunch of their FM receivers and they're giving them out. So that's an opportunity. All right, so we're just a little bit behind, but we're gonna take a 5-minute break. We've got a cushion at the end.